All right, so I just want to talk a little bit about connection slash love as a human need. Um, in the objective personality system, they typically call this human need connection, but Tony Robbins is careful to always list it as connection slash love, which I think is worth pointing out. I think that this is a basic human need. We all need love, but it's not the only one. You can see how any one of these human needs can be totalized and made to be the sort of top of its own pyramid. And in fact, that's what I would argue each personality type is, a certain pyramid with one of these needs at the top of the four, not of the six. As we'll see when we get to growth and service, I believe those kind of cross-cut. But as I was saying in the last video, I'm a significance person. And as a significance person, I kind of have significance as the ultimate pinnacle of what life is all about. And until I've grown to learn, which was where that need for growth comes in, and until I'm actually really of service to others, I may devalue what needs they prioritize. I may say, oh, you don't value doing something significant? How dare you, right? How dare you? Because somebody who has significance as one of their saviors, as I was saying before, the term savior and demon from the objective personality system, the savior being something that's obvious, that you're confident, you can handle it, you can do it, that you work very hard at, you put a lot of effort into. It doesn't come easy, it's not effortless, but you're confident that with effort you can do it. And these saviors are basically the needs that we prioritize. And the demons are places we peacock. We pretend we don't need them, or we pretend we're already good at them, or we say it's easy, we minimize it, we undervalue it, all sorts of things. So for people who have savior connection slash love, they're the people who think love is all you need. But then they end up having unmet needs around significance. And you can see how this looks. Either way, when you fail to meet one of the other, either one need or the other, you end up in a situation where you're putting way too much pressure on one side and trying to get the opposite need met through that. So you have somebody who only prioritizes connection, love, prioritizing raising their family, things like that. But then they don't write their book of poetry or paint their pictures or write their songs. They don't do something that is culturally significant. And so what ends up happening is they put all the pressure on their children to do the significance work. Oh, raising my kid, that's how I get my significance. Well, not really. That's how you get your connection slash love. Then your kid might do something significant, but, not the same thing. Or for the significance person who has unmet needs around connection slash love, maybe they're a celebrity, maybe they've become historically notable, maybe they've written books or been in films or revolutionized the field they're in. But if they've over prioritized significance at the expense of connection and love, then they're going to be trying to get connection and love through the connections that are really meant for significance. Meaning you end up with a teacher dating their students. The teacher is doing all this significant work, but they're starved for connection and love, so they end up having relationships with their students. This is how you get cult leaders, gurus, and things like that. And one thing I'll say, Ra is pretty much unimpeachable. Human design gets accused of being a cult every 6 months or so in the online circles. And one thing I will say is, regardless of how you define that term, whether it is or isn't, or what you mean by that Ra himself was very unimpeachable in the sense of making sure that even though he was a significance person, that he had his connection love needs met. And I don't think it's a coincidence that he was living his design and that his design brought him to that. But I also think your design is going to continually bring you to places where you have a chance to grow and learn. This is perhaps the missing piece for a lot of people getting into human design. And I don't think it was missing for Ra. I think Ra pretty much spelled it out, but people have selective hearing, right? And he would say things like no choice doesn't mean no chance. But people often, many people, will often just hear the no choice part and sort of interpret that in a fatalistic way that is saying, well, there's no choice anyway, what difference does it make? And I don't think Ra was saying that at all. I think what Ra was saying is that when you live your design, you get what's correct for you, and it's not what you might think. And so I'm a significance person. I might think I need to do all the significant stuff, but maybe I just need to chop wood, carry water, right? Or maybe I just need to have, maybe my sacral will bring me to a place where I get more of that connection love. But I don't think it'll always do that, by the way. I think that there is a sort of collaboration between the willingness to learn and the willingness to be guided in your decision making towards opportunities to learn. And a lot of times we keep being guided to those opportunities to learn, and we don't learn. And so then we just keep getting guided back to them again and again and again, and we get stuck there. So a connection love person, how do you know your connection love savior, right? How do you know that's your priority? You use a lot of we statements. You tell a we story. You may be somewhat void in what you want. These are some of the definitions from the objective personality system. So thank you, Dave and Shannon Powers, for these. And you may have a story that you can't do something. You can't, right? Because significance is I can change the world. I can make a difference. Connection love often is I can't. I can't because my kids need me. I can't because my partner won't let me, and so on. Now, this is not to say that significance people never have these stories. They do. But more often you're going to hear, when the significance person is saying they can't, they're really in what we would call a demon state. They're really going into their demons. Something else you'll find about connection love people is they often have a narrative that there's a huge treasure trove of desires for what they want to do in their life that they're waiting on. And the reason they're waiting, well, there's many reasons, but ultimately they're waiting. I won't say the real reason, right? Ultimately, they have many stories for why they're waiting. But I would say the real reason they're waiting is that they're not living their design, because when you're living your design, you're in touch with the flow of life, and life sort of takes over. Your incarnation cross takes over, and pretty soon you're in a sort of a snowball effect, boulder rolling down the hill kind of thing. And then you're no longer waiting. I met a filmmaker once who was doing a documentary film on the service industry called Waiting. And I love this, right? We talk a lot about waiting in human design, but it's a different kind of waiting. First of all, the double entendre, waiting tables. But second, that everyone was waiting to start their tattoo shop, to go on tour with their band. It was like waiting to live out their dreams. And something James Hillman said is just so great here. He had a client who was a tax lawyer. And it's so boring, right, for most people to think about doing taxes. And this client had read just enough Jung to be dangerous and had come to Hillman and said, well, I know that Jung says it's so important to get in touch with the archetypal. When I was a teenager, I was in touch with this archetypal energy when I was in a rock band. And I've decided to quit my job as a tax lawyer and get back in touch with that archetypal energy and go on tour in my rock band. And this man was 50 years old, And James Hillman said, well, look, I'm actually going to give you something else to do. I want you to read about taxation in Egypt. And I want you to read, here we are on the island of Ibiza, read about taxation among the Phoenician peoples, among the Punic peoples, right? Get in touch with the archetypal that is within that activity, not without. So this is relevant to people who prioritize connection love because they often have a story that they're waiting for something to happen to finally be able to do the significance thing. And that's not true. right? I guess the significance people have their own version of that. I'll settle down and get married later, particularly if they're also an uncertainty variety person, right? I guess each of these types has their own version. The variety people, I'll have the certainty later. I'll settle down and get married later. The significance people, I'll prioritize the connection love when I'm in old age. You might not make it to old age, right? The significance people over prioritizing doing something important and just deferring connection and love. The connection and love people saying, I'll write my novel later. I'll do the significance work later. The certainty people saying they'll travel later, that they just have to get a solid foundation first. So there's this myth of later. And that myth of later is basically there so that you have an excuse not to live your design. Because when you really live how you're designed to live, you're engaged with the flow and movement of life, and you're basically in lockstep with the timing of life. And when you resist that, and you haven't surrendered to that timing, you're continually out of sync with the timing. And if you're a connection love person, you're going to be telling yourself a story that you'll do the important stuff later. And if you're a significance person, you're going to tell yourself the story, you're going to do the connection love later. But you find this, right? You find these connection love people who have this tremendous fantasy that as soon as the kids move out, that's when I'm going to get to do what I want. But what they don't realize is they don't know what they want, because it takes a lot of work to know what's worth wanting. Significance people put in this work. Significance people work very hard to discover what they want and what's worth wanting. But connection love people imagine that after 20 years, finally they have free time. This is what we call empty nest syndrome. They imagine that they can just wake up one day and finally get to do what they want, not realizing the whole time this mirage illusion of having all these desires has been sustaining them, and yet they haven't been actually developing and learning what they want. So are you a connection love person? I would estimate about half the people out there are. And if you have savior connection / love, you may have a narrative that love is all you need. And you may have this belief that when finally you have your time for yourself, you'll get to do all the things you've been waiting to do. It's not like the significance people. They just go out and do them, They just go out and prioritize doing what they want. But the connection love people deprioritize that. It's a we story, not a me story, right? So they end up building up this fantasy. And I don't mean to pick on that, right? I mean, every type has its fantasy. But the fantasy of the connection love people is that when they finally have the time, they'll get to do what they want. And the reality is they haven't put in the time to actually learn what they want. And if you ask them to explain their desires are hopelessly vague. They want world peace. They want to have a good life. They want to move to a cabin in the woods. But they're never asking what next and what next and what next. Speaking of next, in our next video, we will look at the need for certainty. The need for certainty. This is one that if you prioritize this need, uncertainty can be very challenging for you. And of course, vice versa. So stay tuned for the next video. We will look at the human need of certainty. Thanks for watching.